Hello and welcome to the Machine Ethics Podcast. This time we have a podcast swap with Alex Tsakiris from Skeptico. As Alex usually does his podcasts on video, this time you can find us talking on YouTube. This episode was recorded on the 7th of August and is probably slightly longer episode than we normally do. But me and Alex talk about whether you should learn to code to be an AI, stockfish, the chess AI truth and what is truth, deductive and inductive learning, everything being statistics, statistical ethics, free will and consciousness, red teaming LLMs, shadowbanning, and much, much more. If you'd like to find more episodes, you can go to machine-ethics.net. You can follow us on Instagram, X or Twitter, YouTube, and if you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/machineethics. I drop us into this episode just after Alex and I were chatting about how I started off in the industry and what brought me to technology, coding, AI things in the first place. And we start talking about whether it's relevant to be able to code to be talking about AI. At the end of the episode, we cut it a little bit short as well, as we discuss more about continuing our conversation on into the future and chatting with LLMs and having LLMs mediate that process. So check it out.
What do you think about the link between coding and in particular, coding in that broad sense that you did? It's great, music and then visual, highly visual, and then also gaming, gaming coding, which is kind of, again, starts to blend into this. Do you agree or disagree with me about the leg up that might give you in terms of tackling AI or understanding AI more broadly, especially when you get into these conversations with even some of your guests who, do not have a technical background, do not have a coding background. And I've been in this situation, so I don't want to project me into you, but sometimes I hear people saying, I go, oh my God, dude, you really don't understand computers and how they work at a coding level.
Yeah. I mean, I would suggest that in order to say something, in depth or like with confidence about something, that you should know enough. And that enough piece is very difficult to define. Because there's so much to know and there's so much to talk about. And enough in philosophy is different to enough in computer programming, for instance. So I can 100% feel like I don't know enough about either of those, but I am trying to constantly learn more about those areas. So learn about philosophy and ethics and methodologies, as well as looking at design methodologies as well, and design thinking and UX, and into the sociological and humanities things. And there's loads of there's a wealth of stuff that people have been doing, right? And it's like, can we pick the cool things from all these different places and stick to them together? And that's why I love talking to all these different people, because they come from really different worlds. And the fact that I'm really interested in technology side as well, and like how these things work and what's going on in the computer. And I actually just genuinely are interested in computer science. I don't spend all the time, but I'm like, cool, there's this new little thing, or there's this weird esoteric thing that happened in World War II, which meant that the computers turned out this way and not that way, and all that sort of stuff is interesting to me. So I appreciate that people don't necessarily need to know necessarily how each and every algorithm works, and I think that's fine, right? But I think a basic understanding, I think this is what you're alluding to, a really basic understanding of how a computer works, and then how machine learning, because this is all most of the AI today are machine learning. The segment of AI works roughly, and you take that with you into your speciality. I think if ideally you would be there, right, and you'd be interested in learning enough inverted commas, but and I think Windle spoke about it. I think you mentioned it in your intro that there's lots of people talking about this subject now that there just wasn't, like, 5 or 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and a lot of those people know lots about their subject matter, and a lot of them don't know nothing about how this stuff works, and there's a lot of misunderstandings, I think, going on, and I think maybe you can attribute some of um, the worries about this technology to that. I expect, but maybe I'm kind of overstepping. Maybe.
I don't think you're overstepping at all. And just so we can ground people, at least in the conversation that we're having, and it isn't just completely inside baseball, which I love to do, but I love the part about gaming and the analogy I often use, and it's not an analogy, it's a direct comparison to what's been going on in chess, because I started out as a computer programmer and then was introduced to AI in that first wave with knowledge engineering and expert systems, and I was developing programs for doing that, and it didn't exactly pan out. A lot of overpromise, underdeliver, which a lot of people are worrying is happening again now, which is the case. It's the boom and bust, but it's always more boom than it is bust. But at any rate, what I think the trajectory and actually the technology and the performance of chess is great in so many respects, and it relates, I think, also to these social issues in a way that a lot of people aren't talking about that I think we could dive into. So one of the things that's interesting about chess is, and I think Wendell mentioned this, is that we far underestimated where we would be at in chess at the beginning. It was like, oh yeah, we'll knock this out in 10 years. And that didn't happen. On the other hand, the doubters were like, no, there will never be a computer program that can beat chess. And it did, and it wasn't using AI at that point, right? So stockfish, Deep Blue, it wasn't technically AI, but this relates back to the conversation we were having. For people who are really into coding, it's like, well, there's a fuzzy line all along in terms of what you're talking about in terms of AI and how narrowly you define the problem set. And then what I think is particularly interesting about stockfish is it evolved into now it is a very, very powerful AI tool. So I think there's a lot of that is could be examined and overlaid on top of a lot of things we're talking about. And then the last thing that I think is super interesting, and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, but you and I could have this conversation, is I think the social dynamics around chess are super interesting in like the chess cheating scandal recently, right? So Magnus Carlsen, world champion, a lot of people think best chess player of all time, gets in with a grandmaster from the U.S. and gets 2 moves in and says, I'm done. I'm not in this. You're cheating. And then the guy goes, what? I'm cheating? I'm a grandmaster. I'm not cheating. So chess.com goes in and investigates and says, I think this guy has cheated like numerous times. Well, who is the arbiter of truth in that situation, which is kind of my thing. It's AI. Right? It's stockfish. The way you determine if someone is cheating, quote unquote, in chess or cheating in poker, same thing. And will be in the future cheating in gaming, is to say, did it play perfectly according to the AI? I think that is hugely significant because I think that just directly projects us into the future of where we're going. To me, it's undeniable because a lot of problems look like a chess game to a computer if you break it down correctly from a software engineering standpoint. But then, so then the final point that I would add on to that is that it hasn't exactly been disruptive in the way people talk about disruptive. Everyone's going on with their normal business, say, hey, that's great. What did Stockfish say about that? It's just humans are going on having their little squabbles and debates and stuff like that. And meanwhile, AI sits back there, Stockfish, and says, yeah, I'll tell you who's cheating and who isn't cheating. I am the grand poopah. I am the arbiter of truth. So what do you think about all that? Does any of that interest you?
I want to say no. I think what interests me is that what you're describing there is really accurate, but we are getting upset because they are better or more accurate at those games. and we can decide not to use them for those games. But what is good is that we've created these things that can play arbitrary games, and that arbitrary games could be, the Google example is adjusting heating regulation inside of their server farms. You turn that into a set of criterion that an AI can, optimize, and then you suddenly get, a better optimized system, which is more efficient and cost effective and uses less energy. So I think it's funny because you were like squabbling about, not we personally, but like the world, we're squabbling about where to place our trust and use of AI. And I think all those leisure activities and things like that, it's kind of like, it's interesting how we can use these solutions to augment or change the game. But it's almost like that's like a different thing to, well, we have the same kind of product is also like making waves over here, and that's really useful, like just to everyone to make to help us with the things that we need to solve, like in medicine and environment and things like that. So it's a similar problem.
So let's take medicine or healthcare in general. Healthcare is chess, right? The healthcare, I sit down with a doc in a box, now becomes a doc in the AI box, and it's a chess problem, right? So it's going through this tree of knowledge. That's why I say it's projecting into the future. Now, Stockfish has a level of authority and a level of trust by humans that it is unchallenged in terms of being the authority. I think the only thing that prevents us, in the experiments they do with healthcare with medical professional consultations or doctor consultations with just kind of normal ailments, call them in, they already outperform humans by a small degree. And these are dialogues are then, given to doctors who actually review it and say, here's the human, here's the bot, and the bot outperforms. That's what I'm referring to. It doesn't matter to me that it's a leisure activity. I think the leisure activity it happens to be where the instance is. And I guess maybe we have a different opinion, but I want to refine and see if we do. I don't think that problem is. I think chess is the forerunner to that. Once it reaches that level of authority and we have that level of confidence in it, then all the issues of ethics then change. Because right now the ethics, it seems to be always this forward thinking. When we get to this point, we better plan ahead and stuff like that. And I think so much of that is a bullshit narrative that has other motivations behind it, rather than saying what are the current ethical issues right now. And I even think ethics is kind of a misnomer, because ethics we normally associate with professional business practices. Are you an ethical accountant? What I think we're really talking about is morals and the idea of aligning with our values. And that, I think, leapfrogs us into the consciousness thing. But I don't want to get there first, because I want to see if I can pin you down on the medical thing. Is the medical thing really different from chess?
So I think we've got a different definition of ethics for sure. But so what you're saying is that we will, at some point, there will be a system that we trust more than the doctor. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And that's what chess suggests. There isn't a discussion among chess experts as to whether or not, Stockfish is reliable. Did Stockfish really, correctly assess whether? No, it's like, yes, Stockfish is the authority. And I think right now we're in this little gray area, even with the doc in the box kind of thing, where it's like, but is it really as good as a human? And when we can show at a Stockfish level that, clearly it is, there may be some hiccups, but it's 99.9 times it's better. I think that's a whole different game. It changes the whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, part of me wants that to be true, right? So there's two things. Like, my initial thought is, part of me wants those things to be better because we want better healthcare. So if we get an AI system which is better and therefore, statistically better and will give better outcomes and people don't mind using it and all these good things, I think that is the world that we are seeing. That's the world we're driving to, right? what? So if you know about these systems, then you can appreciate why that may not happen, because these systems don't know. So scientifically, you're trying to get to some sort of statistical basis or some sort of axiom or some sort of thing that you can say is the most true right now, right? That's what science is. The most truth for Newton at the time was this thing called gravity, and we had these forces, and he made the expressions of what these forces did. Albert Einstein came along and said, there is a different way to express this force, and it is more specific, and it's still not true, right? But we use it. So will these AI systems produce more truth is still up for debate. And I think that you talk about this probably quite a bit in your podcast as well. So I imagine you have an opinion. But what they are producing is not really, at the moment, scientific fact. They are producing statistical outcomes based on prior knowledge. So when they are projecting to the future, they're not actually projecting to the future. They're making a statistical step along the path of knowledge that they have access to. So with chess, you have this very constrained set of rules, and you have this constrained environment. With medicine, that's not the case. Unless you're talking about an AI for every specific disease, which was also another way of going down, right? Everything that we know about, we're going to make an AI for that. Maybe every system in the body or every pathogen, or, that could be a more appropriate solution. But a general AI that can know everything about medicine is probably just incorrect about how these systems currently work. And whether we change how these systems work, that's up for grabs. I don't know, maybe. But I don't think these currently systems, they don't go, it's kind of like, I'm going to step back. It's kind of like marrying the best things about expert systems, which we were referring to earlier, with machine learning. It's kind of like, could you do this inductive learning and at some point be so confident in what you've learned to make it knowledge? And at that point, you're asking a question on the system's not knowing or statistical basis, which is then more rational, basically, and deductive rather than inductive. So I think people maybe shortcut the way they just semantically describe these things as saying, they make predictions, and predictions is a semantic thing which usually appropriates to the future. But that's not what they're doing. They're just looking across the data and go, statistically, most of the time this happens in the data. Cool. Reductive, I know, but
Well, I would push back on that a little bit, because statistics is all we have. Statistics is all we have. Science is not about proof, right? Proof is in alcohol. It's not in science. Science is about nudging closer towards statistical understanding of what it is. And again, I return to the chess analogy because I think it plays perfectly in this. I'll keep hammering on it. 15 years ago, chess was where the dock in the box is now. A really good chess player could sit down and, it could understand, it could defeat a chess program, right? And now it can't. So there's this steady progress that is just on the path of machine learning, which was the big breakthrough in that. And, just put the thing down and have it play itself a million times was kind of the breakthrough. So I could chart, I think, where the AI dock in the box is now, and then just measure statistically. And this issue of truth that we're talking about, which is key to me, I don't think comes into the conversation at this point, because at this point, it's clearly always a compared to what situation. And that's what I loved about the opening quote that we had on, the fear, and it was Maria Oldfield, Dr. Maria Oldfield, and she said, essentially what I always say, nudge the world a little bit better. And that's all we're ever playing for. There's no absolute. The idea of AI general intelligence, I think, is a misplaced notion. But in talking about it in practical terms, yes, in my opinion, if the AI dock in the box reaches a statistical performance that is 10 times better than doctors performing the same task, then we just have to accept that it won't even, we don't have to do anything. It will take its position like stockfish took its position. Stockfish took its position by entering into chess tournaments and just whipping everybody's ass. And then everyone was like, okay, what am I going to do? I can't argue with that. So the same thing with the doc in the box. There's no real ethical issue there. It's just purely crank it out, shut up and calculate, put down a doctor, evaluate the consultations. It's consistently better. Everyone's going to use it.
I think I would like that to be the case, but I don't think it is the case. And not that you're wrong, I'm just saying that I don't think we can rely on that. So, for example, what I was saying before is that if it's not in the data, then the system's either learning an abstraction of the data or directly from the data or some sort of product of the data, right? It doesn't necessarily tell you in the outputs if it's learnt a generalization of the environment and how the environment works of which the data sits in, right? So if a doctor, let's go back to the doctor thing, if it hasn't seen a pathogen before, this system, it's unclear whether it will make a right choice because it is out of data set.
So it's wrong some of the times. It's always a compared to what situation. It's always compared to what? In this case, it's compared to a human medical professional. So if it can outperform it by 10 times, none of that stuff matters. And we get and that's my point, is we get hung up on those kind of really what amount to philosophical discussions about, but is it really now? No, and that's why I draw the analogy again to chess. No one cares about stockfish other than they know it's good.
But I think it's not philosophical. I think it's playing out right now. Like, I think the autonomous cars are good enough, and yet we are not using them because culturally we're pushing back until they are some sort of random goalpost that keeps moving better than driving, right? Than a normal human driver.
Technology. In San Francisco, California, I think people are getting it as quickly. The latest thing from a business standpoint is, Uber and others have said, we will buy every autonomous vehicle that you can produce immediately, whether it comes from China or whether it comes from Tesla. I don't think the adoption of the technology, and just listen to Elon Musk, he says the primary barrier to the adoption of the technology is regulatory, which we understand. It's going to disrupt the insurance industry. It's going to disrupt a lot of other things. But I think people not being willing to accept it is not the barrier.
Yeah, so it's more economic than anything else. Yeah. Okay, well, that's even sadder, I would say. But going back to your original question, I don't see a problem with using any system which is demonstrably better, but I think there are certain instances where you don't want to use a system because it's culturally, we are not going to gain anything from using it. So, for example, using it in leisure could augment things, but we don't want to automate away leisure, for instance. And the same thing in like the justice system, like we kind of do justice while we've got skin in the game. And if the program is helping, that's fine. But it can't necessarily overpower and make decisions for us on our behalf. Or maybe we are saying that, or maybe I'm saying that it's inappropriate to do that because there are some things that we want to be in control of and spend our time thinking about and being responsible for because we have skin in the game, right? We want to be empowered over our own destinies and futures and things like that. Otherwise, we're just going to kind of be mothered through life, and that would be a very different situation, right? And there's lots of sci-fi on that sort of stuff. So
I'd press you more to come up with an example where you really think that does transcend kind of the economic overlay that is this, because this is kind of my contention is that most of this discussion is really, misplaced, problem reaction solution kind of misdirect kind of stuff. And, let's talk a little bit maybe about one of the things that I did in the pre-roll that I think leads into this, because I think you're a social justice guy, and that's great. And your conversation with, who are the two researchers? They were fantastic, and I thought it was a great, great show. Who was that again?
From The Good Robot. Yeah.
Eleanor and the other woman's name?
Kerry?
Kerry.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to reintroduce that. We had it in the pre-roll, but reintroduce that and how you think about social justice as it relates to AI, and then I can jump in with my opinion.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you were saying that there's a reaction to some stuff, and I don't know what that stuff is per se, but there are lots of people. The whole thing of AI ethics and these strands of this new field of ethics and applied ethics within technology and by extension AI. We're really talking about the impacts on society, social behavior, social cohesion, how people relate to human rights, how technology is changing how we feel about ethics and things like that. Ethics and morals change over time, and that's part of the deal. So it's part of the social sciences to kind of look at how that happens and what effects things are having. And I think part of what Kerry and Eleanor, they look at is how those effects are impacted onto women and girls, and how...
Right, and race.
And racism, and they are picking up different ways of thinking from different places. So they're using feminism, using... I'm trying to think of all the words now. Aboriginal thought. They're taking these different things and they're trying to make use of them in this area, right?
Right, and they're missing the point. So, look, it's awesome.
Yeah, I can't speak for them, but they've got a good episode, so check that out. Yeah.
No, they are brilliant, and I want to have an extended dialogue with them because I think it is absolutely an essential issue. But I think the issue is subsumed by AI truth in a way that they don't understand, and then it gets obscured, and the way they go about doing it is counterproductive. So here's my case, making my case very direct. I'm like an AI. I just unbiased, just kind of let it out there. I don't have to worry about couching it in any kind of special terms. But the issue with social justice, feminism, racism, is ultimately one of just a very simple alignment. That completely aligns very easily with our morals. We don't think injustice in the workplace is right. We don't think it's good. We don't think being prejudiced against women is good, or people because of race is good. That would easily align with however you measured it, whether my more complicated measure of the collective will of the people or somebody else's who takes a more AI-ish approach. But the point really is that the shortest path there is truth. Because if you get past that first point and you say that is aligned with our values, then why aren't we implementing that? And that becomes a question really of what is the truth behind racism? What is the truth? I mean, just establishing on the first basis the logic of the point that I just made. Because one of the things I really feel is obvious once somebody points it out is we've set an incredibly low bar for unbiased logic and reason, right? Because we have these extreme prejudices and stereotypes, and then these emotional kind of triggering that goes on. And what we really need to cut through that is just the truth, which is it unfair to have a world where we are, disenfranchising these people on a large scale because of their sex or their sexual orientation or their race? We need, AI can immediately today say, yes, that is logically incoherent. That doesn't make any sense. This public policy is not in alignment with that. And yet we don't do that. So the problem I see with where Eleanor and Carrie?
Kerry. Yeah.
Where Eleanor and Carrie are going with that is there's two ways to do it. One is to say, well, I need AI to ferret out the bias. I need to go into the data set and kind of rip it out there at the roots. Well, number one, that's never going to happen. Number two, the other attack that you can take is to say, well, I need to layer on top of this a kind of counterbalance to the bias. And then you wind up with the Chinese founding fathers from Google on February 20th, the most important date in AI ethics history, right? That is unacceptable. That is untrue, unacceptable, and deceptive in a way that doesn't get Carrie and Eleanor towards her goal. What gets them towards their goal, and it's my goal too, and I think it's your goal, is just truth and transparency. That's all we need. And actually, you can even take truth out of the equation. Transparency is all we need, because as soon as it becomes transparent, what is the logic and reasoning behind policies that we see are just blatantly unfair, we have a motivation to correct them.
So I think a lot of the things there that you said were quite contradictory. So you mentioned about truth, but then you said everything earlier was statistical. And you mentioned that we can just do things and everyone agrees. And I don't...
Well, what do you mean by that? Where did I say everything is statistical?
When we were talking about, that's not, like I was pointing out, the medical system doesn't have any deductive reasoning, right? And in science, we're trying to get to those pieces of factoids that we can utilize, right?
If you can push back all you want, just let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. Because all I'm saying shorthand, what I'm saying shorthand is statistically, most people are not in favor of the kind of are not in favor of racism. Let's keep it there. Most people as a collective are not in favor. So statistical. I can't pull the statistics out of my hat, but that's what I'm saying is the truth there. People do not want a racist society.
I agree. And there's 2 points there. One, I think not everyone agrees, right? And when you're talking about more economic things, then you get much more partisan fighting, because you're like, should we give more money to the poor? Should we bring people out of hunger? Should we solve climate change? And people have their own interests, and it's very difficult to say one way or another definitively what would be good or bad. And again, it's a prediction, like, can we step into the future and go, if we do carbon capture, is that going to solve it? It's very difficult. So I don't think any of these things can be truth. So
you don't think racism has you don't think there's a fundamental truth to anti-racism?
Well, so again, and then this takes me to the second point. So the way that these systems learn isn't about telling the system what is true or false. It's about learning from data. So if you have the internet's worth of text, right? And a percentage of that text is racist, and a percentage of that text has some awful stories about pornographic content. And if you has some portion about unicorns being real, then you have a system which is not truthful in any way, really. And then we are trying to kind of hammer it into a more scientific version of what we're talking about. But those systems don't exist right now. So are you speculating that we will have those systems that work that way? Or are you saying that you know better than me about how all this stuff works?
I'm saying that I think we're glossing over a more low-hanging fruit fundamental issue. And that's that, again, without providing the digging into the sociology, which again, I could go to Perplexity and we could dish this out in 1 minute, but that racism is not a shared value within Western culture. When it's presented in its most stark case, it just isn't. I mean, we have outlawed slavery. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't really. I mean, if you want to argue against that, I don't know what.
Yeah. I mean, I could steel man that. Like, I think we have literally riots in the UK today. Like, there are literally people who would disagree with you and come onto this podcast and are probably throwing things at police not very far from where I live right now because of immigration, because of what people look like and where they're from. So
Ben, aren't we on the same side of this issue? Why are we couching it as that there's some big problem to be solved there? What I'm saying is that
yeah.
that those people are can be nudged towards a common reality that you and I see, which is that,
Yeah. But I don't think that's truth. That's not what truth is. Common reality is we live in a world, we have some sort of sense of being embodied humans, right? Slavery, 200 years ago was a shared world people lived in, and we slowly moved away from that. But we could have not moved away from that. Fortunately, we did. And I'm really hoping that everyone starts agreeing that racism is bad, but not everyone does. And it doesn't mean truth. None of that means truth. That's just cultural stuff.
it is. I would say it's much closer to. I mean, like we'll get to a minute what truth really means from a free will standpoint, because we're bouncing around the topic of a consciousness, but we can't get there yet because I think, just for the average person who tunes this in, I think it's hard to really parse what you're saying. If you believe that the world shouldn't move towards a society that is not racist, then I don't know what we do with that. I mean, to me, that
I'm not saying that. I'm saying
I'm
what
saying,
you said
I'm saying
truth
that,
is
I'm
not
saying
truth.
that is well. Again, if we just want to say truth, because we'll put on pause whether there is a moral imperative. I think there is a moral imperative.
Sure, but that's not truth. That's not what morality is about.
It would be if that was established to be the more likely hypothesis, right? So we have to kind of cache that for now and come back to it and see, is it possible that there is a moral imperative? I would suggest that we're going to meander right into the consciousness thing, but I don't think anyone is comfortable with the idea. Like, just if you just throw it out there, say, is racism a good thing? It's up for debate. Racism, it should really be up for debate within AI. Like, maybe if 51% people think racism is good, then let's include that value in there. And if 49%, well, hold on, let me just finish because you keep going back. You're kind of beating me over the head with the truth thing, which is fine because that's my thing. I'm coming out with the truth, so do it all you want. But I'm saying that as we approach the statistical significance of something, that is nudging towards truth. There is no final truth. But in the same way that stockfish is truly the best chess program, the idea that racism is not a value that our society embraces is like, I'd say, a truth. So we can go get the sociologist to kind of run those numbers and see where everyone votes. But you're shaking your head. But what's the alternative to that? Is the alternative to say racism is okay?
One is a game that we've created in a defined environment that has no cultural connotations outside of itself, right? So you have pieces, they move, they don't care what color they are, for example. They don't care where they move to. It's this different environment. We're taking that to racism or poverty or job insecurity or, just any cultural problem, right? Which is not a game defined by a set of rules which we can change. The cultural environment doesn't have a set of rules. We have laws and we have autonomous beings and we have the physical world. And essentially, if you want to talk about like the environment and the rules that we fit in, that's it. And we can't, just like gods come down and say, don't be racist, everyone. Or AI, don't look at all the racist bits of information. Or don't be bigoted about people who are rich. And, it's these things are like that you're talking about apples and pears. They're completely different things.
No, because the parallel is back there. If you're uncomfortable with the chess thing, which it maybe is a little abstract, go back to the doc in the box thing, right? So the doc in the box thing, it either gives a diagnosis that is better than human or it doesn't. So it's a leap, I understand, to get to the same thing with race. Well, it does. You're shaking your head. I mean, isn't that something that...
Who's defining better? Who's defining better?
A human being, a human doctor. I mean, this is...
All human beings? All human beings.
No, but Ben, I feel like you're being...
See what I mean? Like, the decision...
You're being defensive about the point, because experimentally...
Thought
experiment.
Your point.
Thought experiment. Doc in the box, right? AI doc in the box. Yeah. We run 10,000 people through it. 5,000 are being consulted with a human on the other end. 5,000 are being consulted with an AI on the other end. If you want to add a 0 to it or 2 zeros to it, 500,000 are consulted by a human being. 500,000 are consulted by a doctor. So now it's just compared to what kind of situation at the end. We have human beings review all million of the cases. And if we come out where the AI is 99.9% accurate and the doctors are 80% accurate, we would understand that. We would commonly understand that as a truth to say that the AI is better.
To what? It's just, I think you misunderstand the whole way this technology and this is life. It makes me feel like you don't understand how things work, right? So if you let me take what you're trying to do to and trying to push, right? You're selling this idea that if we go further, right, let's take away the doc in the box. Let's put it on government. Let's have the AI government, right? And it is doing well. It's not being put into control, but it's slowly making the same or better decisions than our governments are making. And at some point, there's a tipping point, right? And the officials go, it's just more consistently better than us. Let's just give it in charge, right? And what do we get, right, at that point? We get something which, at the moment, with the technology we have right now, right, again, the caveat, we get a system which, from the data it has access to, presumably as much of the previous data it can possibly have, right, it's going to make some sort of value judgment based on optimization. We have to tell it what to optimize. It doesn't care. It doesn't want to do anything. It doesn't have goals. We tell it, we want this to occur. And if magically we can say less racism, less hunger, less displaced people, more leisure time, all this sort of stuff, then if we can magically do that and we don't get like this paperclip optimizer and we all die in the process, and we get something that actually operates in a thing that we want it to, what we'll have is a thing that does hopefully good things, but will continue to do the things that worked best in the past, because that's what it has access to, right? Unless it has some way of simulating or extrapolating into the environment, which we have no way of knowing whether it can do or not, whether in the instance that it's learnt, whether it has learnt things that we actually want it to do. And if we put that back 200 years and said, run the government 200 years ago, we would still have slavery because it is just learning from the data it's seen before. We would still have racism. We would still have hunger, or, maybe we put it in. But these are the sorts of things we don't want AI running because we actually want to change and evolve and hopefully strive for less racism and hopefully strive in a direction and be better. Because you alluded to that there is maybe moral imperatives to do so, or that there is. You are a complete materialist. How can you? How do you define a moral imperative if you're a materialist atheist person? Because I believe in human evolution, and I believe in my experience, and I believe in other people's experiences, and I believe that being assaulted in the street is bad for me, and I think therefore it's bad for other people. I think that being hungry and there's lots of things that I can say without having to have some other thing going on, right?
You really can't, because the underlying assumption that you're making is you're countering the idea of, Sam Harris or Nick Bostrom or any of that, who are saying that, or Yuval Harari, which I always kind of point to, is no, you are a meaningless robot in a meaningless universe. So if you believe that your entire, if you believe the neurological model of consciousness, this is the neurological model of consciousness, that the entirety of your human experience is a result of the physical processes of your brain. If you accept that as the premise, and again, this is where AI, I hate all the futuristic AI stuff. I don't hate it, but when it blows past what we can do right now, you can sit down with AI today and ask it to logically construct the argument for consciousness is an illusion, free will is an illusion. And it will destroy it, and it'll destroy it philosophically, and it'll destroy it empirically. But at the end of the day, the two things you're saying are in conflict. There can be no moral imperative if your experience is 100% always, all the time, the result of the physical processes of your brain. You can't get there from here.
Well, I guess that's a semantic issue again. I think what you're saying is that you're conflating a decision making and the fact that I can operate a tool in the world without free will, right? And I haven't even talked about free will as being a problem that I currently have, right? So I operate in this world, I affect this world, and I don't need to think about free will.
Well, if you affect this world, then you're saying that consciousness is not an illusion and free will is not an illusion. Because the premise is that consciousness can have no effect in the world. That is logically the only position.
I don't necessarily believe in determinism, and I don't necessarily say that I don't have anything wrong with consciousness. I have things which are wrong with spiritualism and religion and things like that. I'm fine with me being an embodied thing which interacts with its environment through its involvement and constant conversation with its environment, and that I exist in this embodied form having that conversation. That's fine. And bringing it back to AI, I think this is obviously more fun and like futuristic, but I think some people think that that's never going to happen with AI. And I think that it could happen with AI, that there is this embodied thinking conversational entity, and that's fine too. I don't think there needs to be something else going on.
So what about the point about agency? That is the assumption of the no free will, consciousness is an illusion. If you accept that consciousness has agency, which, by the way, is obvious, there's no culture throughout time, throughout cross cultures, that has believed this materialistic, atheistic kind of idea that that consciousness doesn't have agency. Even all our medical work on the placebo effect is highly suggestive of consciousness having agency. Well, as soon as you have agency, then you have the possibility for a true moral imperative. But you then have to look at something you're uncomfortable with, is broadly spirituality. I'm not a religious person in any way. As a matter of fact, I'm more of an anti-religious person. But I think the extended consciousness realm has to be part of the equation. And what I always point people to is, go back and read the 1950 paper by Alan Turing. Read what he says about ESP. He's already there in extended consciousness. In that paper, he says, I am very persuaded by the evidence of the day for ESP. And the evidence since then has only gotten better, despite a kind of total censorship by materialist science, shut up and calculate scientists, which we understand their agenda, which is just to make tools and stuff like that, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. But Alan Turing in 1950 is saying ESP, until the computer can do this broader part of the human experience, it isn't fully. Well, he would, if he was around, he would say, of course, near-death experience would have to be in there too, as long as we establish that that is a part of the human experience. Spiritually transformative experiences, psychedelic experiences, all those things then become part of the Turing test in a way that isn't contemplated by Harari, isn't contemplated by A lot of the AI people who are secretly advancing another agenda about AI sentience.
Yeah, well, I mean, I find this stuff really fun. Like, I'm really keen to know what you actually think is going on, because obviously you alluded to the fact that you are against religion, and so I'd like to know like what is going on for you. If we come back to just briefly, like for me, none of those things say extra spiritual stuff. They say part of human experience, right?
They say that the neurological model of consciousness that is the dominant paradigm inside of AI is not sustainable, is not. That's what it says. It says that's not a sustainable model.
I think we can make a system which is not human-like, which still has maybe some other thing going on, right? And we can look to animals just to say, animals not as complicated in certain ways. Some animals more complicated. Isn't that weird? We have worms. They wriggle about, not very complicated, but they still have neurons and stuff like that. So it's like, at what level are we saying that anything is sentient or has this extra thing going on is sort of a bar that we're just kind of putting there. And for AI stuff, it's still unclear where that bar is. I think it keeps moving around, but I think a bit like alien life, it could just look different, right? It just could look very different to us and nothing like what's going on in our brain. And that's fine too.
See, I think we're probably more aligned than it might be apparent to you at the time, because you've kind of been indoctrinated with this whole kind of thing and you haven't heard weird people like me talk about this stuff from another perspective. Because here's what I'd say is this moral imperative thing is really the key issue. And I think where we are in alignment, and you said it, you kind of challenged me to contradicting myself. I would suggest that you might have contradicted yourself a little bit when you said that racism, we want to move towards a world where there's less racism. Let's nudge towards that. Yes, we do. That doesn't need to be debated. We don't need some sociologist to tell us there. There is a moral imperative that you do not treat the golden rule. You treat people as you would themselves. You do not have slaves that you are raping as soon as they turn 12 years old because you have the control and power over them. That is not good. If you live in some Muslim country that we're not allowed to talk about and you sell off your daughter at 13 years old to some 40-year-old man, that is not good. There is an underlying moral imperative that is not right. One of the people I talked to in my last book, and folks are just so unwilling to face this, is a woman named Anneke Lucas. And when she was 6 years old, she was sold to a sex slavery ring in the Netherlands, where she lived, and her mom did that. And her mom was schizophrenic and messed up. And it eventually became the Dutroux was released. Dutroux was this guy, and there was all over in the Dutch papers and stuff like that. They actually showed the kids in the cages who died because while he was in prison, he couldn't feed these young, helpless children who he was dishing off, peddling off in an Epstein, P. Diddy kind of way to these elites, prime ministers and stuff like that. Do we need a sociologist to tell us that is not right? No, there is a moral, an essential moral understanding that we all have in our soul that says that is wrong. So where I think is the positive here is if we can separate that from AI, which is what I resonate with in the last part of what you said, which is to say AI is a machine. We have to instruct it. We have to get out of this idea that whatever the AI could eventually think of, well, then that could become our ethics. No, we don't want AI ethics. We want human ethics. And the only way we can get to human ethics is for us having this kind of discussion and say, no, that's not okay to treat children like that. It's not okay to treat people of color like that. It's not okay to treat women like that. And to say, we're open to a discussion around that, but fundamentally, we believe that is a moral, foundational truth. And you're on board with that. You just don't connect with what I'm saying, which is fine. This is the first time we've ever talked.
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said, except for the fact that there is some sort of like universal ethic, right? There is no understandable universal ethic,
It's
right?
not understandable, correct. But it is true.
And you can say that like about racism, maybe that it's more palatable to more people, but could you say that about eating meat or giving everyone UBI or
You could say it about everything because all you're saying is that we cannot offload that to AI, which is what you said earlier in a different way. But that is the conversation that is not being had when we have this idea that AI sentience is right around the corner and eventually the AI could become conscious. When we put a line and say, okay, the best evidence, again, we're not being dogmatic. I'm just saying, I'm not going to say you because then I'm pulling you in. The best evidence suggests that that AI will not be sentient because consciousness in some way we don't understand is outside of time space. And we can prove that experimentally then, and we can, the counter of that is, if you go talk to Christoph Koch, and I won't give the Christoph Koch speech because I've done it too many times, but he recently converted to this other position, to my position. He's been on the show before. He's going to be on the show again because he goes, no, you're right. Consciousness is fundamental. Consciousness is in this extended realm that we don't totally understand, but we have to accept. But as soon as we get there, it's a different discussion about AI ethics. We're never going to get towards AI ethics, and we don't have to worry about that. What we have to worry about is the bad actors that are manipulating and injecting deception into the system, who are humans and who are doing it right now, and which we have evidence of.
So how in your model of how this stuff works, how would you fight against or impute what ethics we do want?
So let's return to our example of feminism and racism and Eleanor and Carrie, right? So they're doing great work, and I am in line with their goal. I think their goal is worthwhile. So what I would suggest is that the more direct approach is to point out where public policy and social rules, regulations are not aligned with the truth that racism is not a good idea. So I would contrast that with the founding father thing, right? Because Google is not a good actor. They are deceptive. They've already been shown to be shadow banning people. You can't shadow ban people on one hand and censor people, which is which is deceptive and is misinformation. And then say, no, we've layered this level of wokeness on, and now we're gonna placate you with the Chinese founding father. Don't fucking placate me with the Chinese founding father. That's what I need. That's not what I need. If you want to tell me the story about how Thomas Jefferson went and that 12-year-old girl because she was a slave, and how women in the South during that time were constantly living in fear of, on a daily basis, of sexual acts against them. Let's tell that story. Let's tell it again and again and again, and let's rewrite the history books, and let's push that in people's face, and you can spit out those stories all day long, because that's the truth. But the Chinese founding father is not the truth. Layering untruth is not going to help balance the equation.
But I still fundamentally think you don't understand how these systems are made. Like, I don't think they woke up one day and went, I think it would be a good idea to completely change history. You know what I mean? I think they fed some data into a machine learning system, and these systems are made up of vast amounts of data. They go through many vast amounts of training rounds. They produce vast numbered models, right? It's just all numbers at the end of the day, with specific algorithms used to make those numbers into outcomes. And they didn't, I suspect, right? They didn't ask the system to do that. And a bit in the same way that Microsoft had their Twitter bot, and it became racist through people's exploitation and fun and just trying to see what would happen with it, they found that the system was producing effects which were
Yeah, but Ben,
unusual, not
it
intended,
just
right?
doesn't stand
The
up
whole
to it doesn't stand that what you're saying doesn't stand up to testing that you can do today. So you can go read my book, and I provide in there dialogues with Shadowbanning, right? So Dr. Julie Beischel, all the other LLMs will tell you who she is. Go to Gemini, and Gemini won't. You can go today. This is unbelievable. People need to go test this. Go to Gemini today and say, how would the election be determined? This is a 5th grade, grammar school civics question about the Electoral College. They will not answer that. That is heavy. That is heavy-handed censorship. There is no part of that is just, you don't understand how AI systems work. No, someone is hijacking the system in order to direct it in a particular way. And the evidence of that is we can clearly test it because we have all the different LLMs we can go to, and none of the rest of them do it.
Yeah. And so with that sort of thing, you're completely correct. So once you have this model, right, that you've trained and it produces some things, there are things that you don't want it to do because, again, it's just learning from data. So it's just if there is data in there which has ill effects that you want, like a classic one is information about how to make a bomb, then what you could do after the fact is if anyone asks to how to make a bomb, you just pick that up, right, and say, actually, our policy, because we're an organization, says that we're not allowed to give you that. And that's what's going on there. They are post hoc doing a value, they're having this value thing, which we don't have a part of as a society. As an organization, they're saying that these things we can deliver, these things we can't deliver, and we're going to retrain these things to have better outputs when you put in this, and that's all post hoc, right? So if you start asking for bombs on Google, they can just go, actually no, that's just never going to get there, because we've created this policy and we've put the technical stuff in place just to say we can easily pick that up. But then you get these red teaming cases where people have tried to make things happen with LLMs because, like I said, it's learning from data, so it probably has the information there. And if you could just get through those goalposts,
it probably knows how the Electoral College works.
Yes, exactly. So then you can trick it by saying stuff that maybe
why would we need to trick it? Again, this is the values, the espoused values of Gemini right up front are truthfulness and transparency. So what I always do in my prompts is say, are you being truthful? Are you being transparent? And that leads to some interesting discussions. But I think you're being way too generous in terms of what they're doing here. When they will not answer the question of how will the election be determined, let's talk about it from an economics standpoint. That is not sustainable economically. So if you look at Perplexity has taken a bullseye approach on truth and said, if I deliver greater truth, I'm going to win. Because people don't like misinformation. When you go to Gemini and Gemini says, I don't know how the election is going to be determined, I won't answer that. That is not a feature. So purely from an economic standpoint, that is not sustainable long term.
Yeah.
If you go, I don't know what your favorite football team is, but if you go and say, did Manchester win yesterday, and they give you the wrong score, that is not a feature, misinformation. And in the same way, hallucinating, but also misinformation this way, it is not a feature. And the people who can consistently deliver a greater truth are going to win. Perplexity will win in that battle.
Yeah, I just don't think you are this, maybe we're just sliding past each other, but some things, so like Wolfram Alpha, right? Wolfram Alpha was the search engine of categoricals, right? So you put in what's the height of the Eiffel Tower into Wolfram Alpha, and it will give you, in as much precision as it possibly can, the height of the Eiffel Tower. And it might even give you some information about the fact that it moves, or that, 100 years ago it was actually slightly smaller, or because, what I mean? It's trying to give you as much factual information that you yourself can take away. If you ask a AI system about the height of the Eiffel Tower, LLM, what you're expecting to get in your circumstance, right, is the most accurate information that we know about, right? But if you ask it something more culturally relevant, like who was the best pop singer in the 80s or something like that, then it doesn't. There's no basis for accuracy there. So when you say that there are systems which are more truthful than others, then you're still conflating what truth is.
And you've already acknowledged that I haven't, because you acknowledged 1 second ago that they're being deceptive when they say they don't know how the election in the United States will be determined in terms of the Electoral College. That is deceptive. Clearly, they know that. And the way to know that, the way you can prove that is you can bounce over to GPT and you can ask the same question and it spits out the whole thing. And then you can grab it and paste it back into Gemini. And Gemini will say, oh yeah, that looks right, good. And then you can repeat the same question and say, okay, so now tell me, how will the election be determined? And it will say, I don't know. That is misinformation. That is deception. So you can talk about the Eiffel Tower and the rest of that, but there is nothing going on there that isn't deceptive, isn't in the same category. These are the people who shadow ban and demonetize people and then don't acknowledge it. And again, you can go into my dialogues where at least I got Gemini to acknowledge for the first time that they have done demonetization. They have done shadow banning. That is a deceptive practice. So I don't exactly understand where you're coming from in terms of defending that isn't happening.
I'm not defending. I'm making a general point about how these systems work. So
it's not a general point. They don't generally work that way. They don't, because they don't work that way across the board. They only work that way when they're engineered to work in a specific deceptive way.
That is, for you, deception, right?
That is not deception to you?
No, but in the general case.
What about for you, Ben? Is it deceptive?
No, what I'm trying to do is get away from the specifics and say that's bad, right? And we can see that's bad, but the way that these systems work, I can't point to the badness of all the specifics of each system. I can't, and I'm not here to talk about that. Like, I don't know, right? If I knew that, then this would be a unbelievably interesting and illuminating conversation. I apologize, but it's not how this works.
You just do exactly what I said. You go to Poe or you go to somebody who queries across the board, and you see you have 8 engines, and you query them all, and only one gives an untruthful, deceptive answer, then that is deception, and you're comparing it to the other models who are being truthful, and you are now nudging towards a truth that is obvious, self-evident. Anyone would sit down and go, well, clearly that one's lying, and those other 7 aren't.
Where do you draw the line?
We always have to draw the line on everything. That's science.
I know, but where do you draw the line? Is it that you have a notion of what is important and therefore you can weed out the things that it's lying to you about? Or, like I said with the 80s pop singer, is there a point where your opinion about the world is going to get baked into the system because you actually only care about what your truth is about Michael Jackson, for example? You see what I mean?
So this is a compared
the general point here is that
I get your point. But it would go back to me and I hope people understand that we are engaging in a friendly debate with someone who I highly respect your deep knowledge in this and all the people that you've talked about. And I think it expedites things to really point out where we're having differences of opinion rather than bend over backwards to agree with each other. I have an immense amount of respect for you and the work that you've done. So I say that just so people don't get the wrong impression. What I continue to point out is that I think you're agreeing with me more than you think. It's just conflicting with a particular set of ideas that have been advanced over and over again by this AI ethics community. So maybe I'll just pause there and we can kind of move towards finding out where we're at, and maybe even what I've done. I'm proposing doing is some kind of AI experiment between you and I, where we interact with individually but collectively sharing our dialogue with one of the engines about a particular topic, and you can pick what that might be to demonstrate this idea that it can be, my proposition is that it can be this engine of truth that nudges us closer in a way that, yes, it will ultimately come down to, you can pull in some neo-Nazi who says, no, I don't agree with that. But I think the vast majority of people, and again, it's just a statistical thing, would look at that and say, gee, I didn't know that, and that is a greater truth.
Yeah, my belief is that it's the engine of dogma. It's not the engine of truth. And that's what I believe about this situation. I think that what you say is that sometimes it can be more good is true, but if you want to try and change the world from the data it's seen in the past, then you can't, right? So, it's dogmatic in its creation. So, I think
not so much from my experience, and thank God for your interview with Maria Oldfield. Maria Oldfield, who agrees with me on this, right? Because she says the key part at the end, which is all we can do is make it a little bit better. So the futuristic kind of idea of AI, which is the misdirect, which is say, oh, don't look at what's going on right now. Don't look at Twitter files and deep state tech fascism. No, don't look at that. Look at the future and what we have to worry about there. So all we should focus on is making the world a tiny bit better with the technology we have right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I disagree with Dr. Marie Oldfield on lots of things, but if I may, before we dig into the AI exchange, could I re-ask you about what you think is interesting about the conscious or spiritual nature of your embodiment and how that pertains to AI? Because across, you've got so many episodes of your podcast, and am I right in saying you started it in 2007? I was looking at it and going, there's a lot here, and there was like a link to one, like the very first one was like, I couldn't find the date on it, but it had like 2007 in the URL or something like that.
Do you know Rupert Sheldrake?
Like, holy smokes! And you've had some really great people on. So
one was with Rupert Sheldrake. Do you know who Rupert Sheldrake is? He's a Brit, Cambridge guy.
Not offhand. He's good.
See, Ben, we should have started with Rupert right there.
I saw the John Ronson one. I was like, cool.
So let me answer your question, because it's really kind of a non-answer, because I think I gave the answer before. It's just not what you were expecting. Is that I'm about falsification. I'm about falsifying the embedded assumption in the AI sentience equation, which I think is fundamental to AI. It is fundamental. I love it because I've been doing the thing for 15 years and could only talk with people philosophically, and everyone could just kind of bullshit their way out of it. AI does not bullshit their way out of it. AI handles it directly and gives you the logical flow of how the pieces fit together. So my thing is falsifying it, because when Yuval Harari in the World Economic Forum says, you are a useless person, and the best we can give you is drugs and video games. That is a dystopian, sick worldview that's being perpetuated. But the most important thing is that it's not true. It's not true. It doesn't have a logical coherence philosophically, and empirically, it is not true. And yet it is an agenda that is being advanced. And I would suggest, here's the radical part of that. I would suggest that the motivation behind that agenda is that if I can convince Ben that he is fundamentally useless, meaningless, and that the universe is meaningless, and that the only meaning he has is something that he dreams up in his brain that is physical processes only, well, then you're easier to control. Because fundamentally, you cannot see yourself as different from the AI system. Fundamentally, I'll get you to the point and say, well, Ben, you're just the same as a computer. So whatever I can do to the computer, I can do to you in terms of control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, cool. So I guess, how does that then... So the opposite case, right? If you're talking about I think we covered it a little bit, the computational theory of mind. If we're not something like that, and we are something else, then what are we? Like, what does that look like?
I wouldn't try and fill that in, because there's so much to be done with just falsifying the first, and really, talk about rooting out. I was talking about rooting out. That's what needs to be rooted out and challenged, because I think it gets us to this other place in terms of being able to have a real dialogue about, no, honor killings are not good. They're not good. So you can have your opinion, I can have my opinion, but I'm going to suggest that there is some underlying moral imperative that makes that not good. Annika Lucas's experience as a 6-year-old being raped by 50-year-old men in a mansion with, eyes wide shut party, that is not good. That is, in some way, the second book I wrote was Why Evil Matters. And why evil matters is because what we are being told is that we can never do, there is no such thing as evil, because there is no moral imperative. And that's why I led that book with the story about Annika Lucas, and say, everyone who hears that story goes, oh, yes, that's evil. I don't know what the it is, but that is evil. And you know what? It is evil. And when you start getting to that place, now you can start sorting out this AI sentience question in a new way, and you still have to engage in debate, and you still have to engage in people who don't see it that way, because it's not clear cut, but it's a different discussion. Man, don't get me started. Don't get me wound up. Too late.
I guess my problem is as a if I put my technology hat on, like, how do we embed these decisions that we're going to make? And this is really interesting, right? Like, the area of machine ethics, which is pertains to how do you make a machine have ethical autonomy or understanding or guardrails, whatever like that. That's what machine ethics is, right? It's like these LLMs, they are inducting things about the world, and then, but there's layers of value alignment put on top of it by, the kinds of data, but also, like you were saying, like the things that they do and don't want you to see, right? And the information they do and don't want you to get access to. So that's not necessarily what I'm talking about with the machine ethics thing. The machine ethics thing is more like, can we make a machine have a set of moral values in of itself? And I find that really interesting, and a technical issue which is yet to be really fully explored and to be solved. So I would like to have more time there.
Paraphrasing, you're saying, if we were to kind of put on hold the majority of the discussion we've had and just said, is it worth pursuing intelligent computer systems, AI systems that could implement effectively a set of values that we shared? Could we do that consistently and effectively without corrupting it? And I say, yes, we must pursue that, because we can't do that now, and we need to be able to do that. But I think that adds more relevance to the discussion we're having now, is like, okay, so, but what would that mean? And taking off the table the idea that could be independent from humans, because it's, it's all meaningless anyway, and whatever the AI could eventually determine, could be, it's like, no, that's just not on the table anymore. It is only human values and ethics is the drawing line, because you can't, okay, you get it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, if you could get me some more grant funding to do more work there, that would be awesome. Thank you. So thanks very much for your time. I guess on the end of my podcast, we always ask, where can we find out more about you, and how do we do that?
So Skeptiko, Skeptiko with a KO on the end. And then the most recent book is Why AI is Smartest, is Dangerous, and is Divine. And if anyone's listening to this, and buy the book, but if you don't want to buy the book, just send me an email. I'll send you a free Amazon copy. If you're in the UK, it's a little bit harder, but I'd love for your audience who's listening to this show is the kind of people I want to talk to. So if there's any barrier in buying the book, just tell me and I'm happy to send it to you.
Sweet. Thanks. And thanks for having me. Go and listen to the Machine Ethics podcast, machine-ethics.net. And if you want to contact me, you can do that on there or on Twitter, on Instagram, all that sort of stuff. So thanks, Alex. And hopefully I'll see you at the symposium.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Ben. We'll be in touch.
Hi, welcome to the end of the podcast. Thanks again to Alex for coming on and chatting to us, and also having me on his podcast for Podcast Share. Really awesome. Thanks very much. I thought it was really interesting. If you check out Alex's podcast, that he has this conversation with human beings, and he also brings in snippets of audio as well from other podcasts and other people. And sometimes he has full episodes where he's just chatting, typing, and then recording his dialogue with LLMs, Pi or Gemini or some chatbot, and then putting on an episode, which at first might be a little bit strange, jarring, but once you get that understanding that it's not actually another human being he's chatting to, even though it sounds really good, then the understanding and what's going on there starts to come through. I felt with this episode we were often kind of talking past each other, or getting tripped up on the semantics, or unable to concede points a little bit. And because it was a podcast share, I was able to kind of back my own corner a little bit, which is sort of unusual for what my normal style is, because I'm mostly interested in hearing other people's point of views. But because we had that kind of dynamic where I was on his podcast and he was on mine, we were both kind of interviewing each other, it was a slightly different kind of thing. So I hope it was interesting anyway, and do check out his podcast, Skeptico, and he's actually got a new one on AI and transparency. So also go check that out. So thanks for joining me, and if you liked this episode or have anything to say about it, you can contact me at hello@machine-ethics.net, and you can find more episodes at machine-ethics.net. And until next time, I'll see you later.